We are back. Welcome into First Draft. I actually saw the sun for the first time in a while here in Connecticut, which can mean only one thing. The NFL draft is just around the corner. And that also means that Mel's Mock 4.0 is just hours away as we say hello and welcome in to our guy Mel Kiper Jr. And Mel, how close are you to finalizing what will be your final mock before the 2024 NFL draft?
Field, I was tweaking it this morning. I'm tweaking it throughout the day. I'll be tweaking it some tomorrow, and it'll be up obviously Wednesday. We'll be talking about Mock 4.0, which also includes round 2. So first and second round mock coming out Wednesday. Field, we got a lot of stuff coming up this week and next week, obviously leading up to the draft, but finalizing, tweaking things. And guess what, Field? I got a shocker for our viewers, listeners, and for you, Field. Guess what? This is taking the place of 5.0, so this is my final mock of the year, right? I'm going to do a lot of news and notes. I'm going to project teams and have fun morning of the draft. I'm projecting trades in mock 4.0, both in the first round and in the second round. So I got some second round trades as well to really throw in there, and that's going to talk about maybe some predictions and some analysis that could be going on there. So a lot of fun stuff in mock 4.0.
Yeah, and by the way, you buried the lead here, Mel, because you handed off day of mock draft duties, as in day one mock draft duties, to me. So now I'm the guy that has to put out a mock draft the morning of round 1, and if it's absolutely terrible, there's no one to blame but myself. Let's dive into today's show. And Mel, you kind of suggested it, but we are just about 3 weeks away from the 2024 NFL Draft, and we're going to give you guys 3 bold predictions. And Mel, as you and I were discussing our ideas and we were sort of debating how to use this topic, I wanted to make clear, these are bold predictions. If these don't come true, there's a reason why we're calling them bold predictions. If they were easy predictions, we'd tell you that Caleb Williams is going to the Chicago Bears. So you're going to start things off here. Give me a bold prediction for the 2024 NFL Draft.
Yeah, we all talk to our friends in the NFL and friends that were in the NFL. They have a lot of friends that are currently in the National Football League field. So you get a lot of opinions from a wide array of sources, right? Intel, whatever intel is provided to you, you got to listen to it, Field. You got to listen when we're talking about projecting where a player's going to go. And I ask about Michael Penix Jr., quarterback Washington, and Bo Nix, quarterback Oregon. I'm hearing second round. So what I did was here, I think teams trade up in the second round. I could see the New York Giants trading up for Bo Nix, right? Why not Michael Penix? Well, Michael Penix had injury issues. Daniel Jones had injury issues. So you go for Bo Nix, durable, Auburn, Oregon, right? So the Giants move up early second round to get Bo Nix, and the L.A. Rams move up in the second round to get Michael Penix Jr. Keep in mind, Will Levis last year, Tennessee moved up from 41 to 33 to get Will Levis, okay? That was the first pick, second pick in the second round, 33rd overall. There was only 31 first-round picks, right? Joey Porter Jr. went 32 to Pittsburgh. Will Levis went 33 on the trade up. Bo Nix, talk about the accuracy. We talk about everything he has in terms of being a 24-year-old who's played a ton of football with a gazillion starts, right? So for the New York Giants, if Daniel Jones isn't the guy, Bo Nix will be ready quickly. And certainly for Michael Penix Jr., the heir apparent to Matthew Stafford with the L.A. Rams. So I think it makes sense if Bo Nix and Michael Penix Jr. aren't going in the first round, these teams are aggressively trading up into the early second round to acquire them.
Mel, I love the call. You know why? Because I had Michael Penix Jr. going in my 2-round mock draft at the top of the second round after a trade-up. There was actually the Las Vegas Raiders, but certainly the New York Giants would make a whole lot of sense, too, as one of the teams to consider moving up for either of these two quarterbacks. My first bold prediction is this, Mel. Before I actually deliver you guys what my first bold prediction is, and for those that are watching right now, they see the gargantuan numbers that Michael Penix Jr. put up over his past 2 seasons with Washington. I want to ask you a question, Mel, before I give my prediction. What part of the process has Troy Fautanu from Washington not been outstanding in, from the tape to the pre-draft process involving the Senior Bowl, the Combine, the Pro Day, all we've heard about him on the private workout and 30-visit scene? What has he not done at an incredibly high level, in your opinion? Anything?
Nothing at all. He's a great player. He's one of my favorite players in this draft, Troy Fautanu is. And at left tackle, we said, well, he can't be a left tackle. Well, why can't he be? His arm length is better than Joe Alt, right? So you think about Troy Fautano, left tackle, right tackle. We know he can be a great guard. He's got the skill set to be a phenomenal Pro Bowl guard. I said if you're going to talk comp, it was Zach Martin. Zach Martin played left tackle at Notre Dame, exclusively field, and seamlessly moved to guard with the Dallas Cowboys, maybe developed into a Pro Bowl caliber player. Troy Fautano is a guaranteed Pro Bowl player. Now, I don't think he'll be a Pro Bowl tackle, but he'll be serviceable and good. I think he'll be certainly a Pro Bowl caliber guard. I ask you, Field, I have him in the mid-first round in mock 4.0. I won't tell you what team, but in that mid-first round area, how high could he go?
The bold prediction is that Troy Fautano goes in the top 10 of the 2024 NFL Draft now, because I don't think there's a single thing that he has done within his own power to dissuade teams from believing that he might be the best offensive lineman, at worst the second best offensive lineman in the entire class, only behind Notre Dame's Joe Alt. And if the Chicago Bears don't land one of those three wide receivers, and I'm not so certain that any, Marvin Harrison, no chance with him. Malik Neighbors, I still think no chance. And Rome Odunze, I'm not convinced he'll be there at number 9. If you're the Bears, how much would you love Troy Fautanu to come in and help fortify the interior of that offensive line? Or a team that looks to trade up, or the New York Jets. Yes, they have added a pair of veteran left tackles this offseason, but it wouldn't hurt to have Troy Fautanu, who at worst is a super sub for you at 3 different spots or 4 different spots as soon as next year, and a guy that could be a fixture for this Jets offensive line going forward. That's bold prediction number 1 from email. Number 2, and I'm going to have to kind of tweak this one a little bit. I'll explain why in a second. We're all talking about, of course, Quinyon Mitchell and Terrion Arnold, 2 players that we both love. My bold prediction, though, is that Cooper DeJean, who, as you and I are talking right now, Bill, will be the second defensive back drafted in this year's class. I called him a cornerback in this exercise, Mel, but I think there's a chance that a lot of teams, as a matter of fact, many teams that I've spoken with continue to view him as a safety prospect. I know you believe he can be the best safety in the draft, and I think he's going to wow at this workout today. He's going to be off the charts athletic, which we already know about him. This kid could find his way into the first half of the first round. What do you think?
Think about the pick sixes, the anticipation, the awareness. I mean, this kid is a guy, plug-and-play guy, can play safety, can play corner. I think Jacksonville Jaguars will be really interesting, Field, to say how early could he go. Jaguars pick, at 17? He would be a great fit in that defensive secondary for that football team. So I'm with you. Cooper DeJean's a first-round pick. Just how high he will go is still to be determined.
Yeah, again, bold predictions. My bold prediction, part 1, is that Cooper DeJean, coming off of that leg injury suffered towards the end of his Iowa career, is back today, working out in front of scouts who are reminded just how springy, explosive, athletic of a player as he is. And again, not every single team that I have talked to has said to me that they view him as a safety prospect in the NFL. But many have, Mel. And the beauty for Cooper DeJean is he can play either, but if he's going to be a safety in the NFL, I don't think it's a question that he would be the highest drafted safety player in this entire class, right? There probably isn't anybody in the top 40 or 45, maybe even 50 picks besides Cooper DeJean at the safety spot that would actually generate that kind of interest. But the opportunity to play at multiple spots after the athletic testing today has me believing that Cooper DeJean could be the second defensive back taken in this year's class. I mentioned the versatility as either a cornerback or also as a safety. As Mel will tell you guys, Cooper DeJean could be a Pro Bowl caliber punt returner as well. We all remember the infamous play this past year where Iowa should have won against Minnesota on that late punt return by Cooper DeJean that was errantly called back. It should not have been called back. I wanted that moment for Cooper DeJean. All right, coming up here on First Draft, we are going to talk sleepers. And there are a million names that we could choose. We wanted to talk about a couple of players that we haven't talked about as much, and we define sleepers a little bit differently in each category. All right, more First Draft in just a moment returns. He's Mel Kiper Jr. I'm Field Yates. Sleepers on the other side. All right, we're back here on First Draft. And Mel, the problem with using the word sleepers, and I know you're not big into the fantasy football yet, but you will be one day, is that people always say, you give me this sleeper, I've heard of that guy. Well, football is so popular, Mel, that there's not a single player that people have never heard of. So we don't want to call this sleepers as in like, hey, just a guy that you have literally never heard the name of before. Some of it is like sleeper/surprise. So why don't you give me your sleeper or surprise that could happen come the night or the second night of the NFL draft?
I don't want to repeat all the guys. Over the course of these talks, Field, and podcasts, I've always mentioned the guys who weren't at the Combine. And Mallory, the defensive tackle at Arizona State. Love Jaden Sheridan, running back at Monmouth. He was there. Think about the other players like Dejan Palmer, the wide receiver at UAB. We've already done that, though. Yep. We've been there, done that. So let's go surprise, Field. A surprise. Defensive tackle did not shape up the way I thought it would be. I know the way you thought it would be, Field. A lot of those guys, because of injury, not playing as well as expected, have made it very difficult to grade some of those guys. And you got Devondre Sweat, the run stuffer. Maybe he drops into the third round. So after Byron Murphy II, who's the second highest rated defensive tackle is the big question that's up for debate, right?
Yeah.
Who is that going to be? I think it could be Rook Aroraro from Clemson. Could be the second defensive tackle off the board. Braden Fisk, right? Heck of a player at Western Michigan, heck of a player at Florida State, but he's got short arms, right? Just shows up on tape. Rook Aroraro, late developing football player, right? His best football is ahead. He has not yet become the player he can be with coaching. I always say D-line coach, offensive line coach, critical in the development of a player who's still raw, still improving, but has all the talent in the world and Field. He has the work ethic and the passion for the game. He wants to be great. Rook Aroraro, after all said and done, in a defensive tackle class that did not shape up as advertised back in August, this kid jumps in to that second defensive tackle off the board after Byron Murphy II goes somewhere in that mid-first round area. Rook Aroraro goes somewhere early to mid-second round.
You know, Mel, I've been talking about Mason Smith and how one of the reasons why his stock is moving up teams' boards is in part because he's 6'5" and 1/8 of an inch. He's 309 pounds. He's got these long 35-plus inch arms. He has the physical measurables that you are looking for, right? Aroro's in that same bucket as you just described. I mean, you've got the Braden Fisks and Johnny Newtons and even Byron Murphys who are all undersized. You might see a little bit of a dip for those guys not named Byron Murphy because teams are looking for the quote-unquote more conventional defensive tackle prospects. I like the point you made about how Rook's best football is ahead of him. He started playing football, Mel, as a junior in high school. He's still new to the game. That's like 5-6 years ago. So the fact that he has not become a fully formed product is totally understandable and justifiable. You mentioned the outstanding athletic testing during the pre-draft process as well. And pass rush upside, right? Teams want players that can live behind the line of scrimmage. Rook certainly has a chance to do that. Mine is a sleeper that, like, this is day 3, probably at best here, Mel. And, you know, recently it's been the South Dakota State show at the FBS level. The Jackrabbits have been absolutely incredible. But prior to that, it was the Bison of North Dakota State. And offensive lineman Jalen Sundle is a player I think deserves some mention here. He's had kind of an interesting path. He's a 6-year player at North Dakota State. Obviously the COVID year, and a lot of guys in that Bison program end up taking a redshirt year because they're just so talented. He was a center for 3 full seasons, might have been 4 full seasons actually, and then he moves to left tackle for his final season, Mel. And I know this is going to sound completely ridiculous to some, and maybe oversimplified, but a lesson that I learned early on in my scouting days was that if you're studying a player not at the Division I level, this guy needs to be dominant. It needs to show up all the time. And Jalen Sundle, the dominance, physically and athletically, I think showed up enough to make me feel like he's got a real chance to be drafted on day 3. He's 6'5", 301 pounds, so I'm not entirely sure what position he ends up playing. I have him ranked as a center with a relatively light body frame, but he's got some serious nasty and some attitude to him, Mel. Wouldn't surprise me if sometime in the 6th or 7th round, Jalen Sundle, here's his name called during the NFL draft. What do you think?
I agree with you. I think after that center group, once you get past and around that 5, 6, 7 area Field, you could definitely put Sundell in there. This kid has that versatility. A defensive lineman as well back during the prep days. When you talk about smart, mean, nasty, and has that ability to step in with an offensive line coach, it can develop. Jalen Sundell coming from North Dakota State and the Bison, as you said. I think when you get into the 5th, 6th, 7th round area, it certainly wouldn't shock you. Priority free agent. I don't know if he gets to that point because I do think you could grade him in that mix. Tanner Bordolini's in there with the versatility as well. But then you get into that center group with Dylan McMahon from NC State and guys like that. To me, I think you get into the day 3 area. I'm not saying early day 3. I'm talking late day 3 area with that versatility that you talked about, Field, that Sundell, I think, will come off the board.
All right, Mel, just to sort of peel the curtain back here a little bit. You and I were talking about this before the show actually began. It is an amazing process to try to stack players up past like really even the first 50, Mel. But when you get past like 120, 150, I mean, you're talking about players that you could see as number 151, and I might have that player at 262. It is such beauty in the eye of the beholder. So while I think Jalen Sundell is a later day 3 pick, and you kind of agree with that assessment, truthfully, when I tell you that I don't exactly know where this player is going to go, Mel, my feeling is that I don't know where a ton of players are going to go on day 3, because we see teams' boards vary so dramatically once we get past that first kind of 100 or so
I'll say this, Field.
Go ahead, Mel. Yeah.
I will say really quick, the fine line between being a late 4th, early 5th to being a priority free agent is just that much.
Yeah.
So you're right. You get into that late 4th, early 5th round to 7th round, very much splitting hairs with a lot of these prospects.
Yeah, we're not trying to take ourselves off the hook here, America. We're just saying that people get so bogged down on round projections. And I understand. I'm interested in that stuff as well. But the reality is that how teams see players varies so dramatically that don't be too concerned if your team in the early 5th takes a player that you saw projected to go in the 7th. That is the way the NFL draft works. All right, coming up next, we are going to ask burning questions. It is going to be fun. We begin with difficult players to rank. More first draft here in just a second. All right, back here on First Draft, he's Mel Kiper Jr. I am Field Yates. And Mel, these are some questions that you and I have pondered over the weekend. And we start here. Who's the hardest player, in your opinion, to rank as a prospect this year?
Can I give you a couple? I'll go Jared Verse,
Take as many as you want,
defensive end, Florida State. Love the way he plays the game, Field. Jared Verse attacks. He plays hard. He hustles. Okay, we know what the powerhouse he is. He'll handle his run responsibilities. He will be a guy who plays in the NFL, I think, for a while and has a successful career. But is the tightness in the hips going to prevent him from being a 10-plus sack a year guy, an 8-plus sack a year guy? You're drafting him in the top 10 to 15. You want double-digit sacks out of that player, right? Will he be that guy? Will he just be a steady force? Good player, but not great. So you go from 10 down to that 25 area. That's the range in terms of where he could go, and ranking him very difficult. Guys that have great workout numbers but aren't productive, or guys that have average workout numbers but were really good on tape, Field. That's the problem. Chop Robinson, Penn State pass rusher, not the production. Not the production at all. They'll have 2 sacks against UMass, right? Not a lot of other sacks this year. You can excuse it away. We always try to excuse it away. Why wasn't it 8 or 9 sacks? You always got to try to reconcile that, because you love the workout. You love the fact that he does hustle. He does play hard. Bottom line is Chop Robinson, Penn State pass rusher, difficult to rank. Ennis Rakestraw Jr. on the flip side of that, pretty good corner at Missouri, right? With Chris Abrams-Drain on the other side, benefited from Darius Robinson, who's, by the way, Darius Robinson is back into the first round after his pro day. Bottom line is, though, Ennis Rakestraw Jr., no longer a first necessarily, more of a second-round pick, because he didn't test great in the 4.51 area for that 40 time. But good player, not great test. Chop Robinson, tests great, but didn't have the results. Those 2 kids are very tough to put a final grade on as well.
Now, you know what's funny is you and I got the same intel on Darius Robinson's pro day, because someone reached out to me and said, holy crap, I just watched this Darius Robinson pro day, and it's a crime if that kid doesn't go in the first round. He had an absolutely splendid day.
He will go in the first round. He will, Field.
Mel, I've got an idea of where he will go. I almost had him there in my first. You know, it's hard to make everything happen that you hear. I'll give you a player that's hard to rank, Mel, and it continues with our pass rush theme. It's Laiatu Latu, and I'll just say this. I will say it until April 25th. It's the best defensive tape of any player in the class. It's not close. This is one of the most gifted pass rushers that I have seen in quite some time, Mel. His refinement as a rusher is terrific. He's a good athlete, not a dominant athlete. But the most important part of why this is difficult is he's got a medical red flag in some teams' eyes. He was medically retired from football a few years ago. I have been told consistently that there are several teams that see no long-term concern with Laiatu Latu, Mel, but are those several teams the teams that could be in the top half of the draft? I don't know the answer to that. Are those several teams that are picking between 25 and 32? Maybe. You just don't know. It's one of the hardest parts of the process. I love the player. I think the tape is unimpeachable. This guy is a top 10 talent in the class. But because of the medical history, I can't guarantee you he goes in the first 10 picks. All right, Mel, let's talk about something. You and I are hearing all kinds of things. We're doing our best to talk to as many people on top of our own film evaluation and try to get more information here and there, here and there. Is there something that you've heard that has kind of surprised you along the way?
Yeah, Matt Miller was talking about it, and others have said J.J. McCarthy second overall to the Washington Commanders over Jaden Daniels. And I called around, you check, and still say, yeah, you can, and this is what I heard, you can hear that maybe Adam Peters, GM of the Washington Commanders, came from San Francisco, right? Where they made a mistake with Trey Lance, right? Remember, they were lucky with Brock Purdy as Mr. Irrelevant, but Trey Lance was a major bust, third pick overall. What does Adam Peters learn? How does he view quarterback now? You have, Kingsbury there as coordinator. You can really like a quarterback. Doesn't mean you don't like the other guy and you take the other guy. So even though they may really like, the intel may be right that they really do like J.J. McCarthy, they like him enough to take him over Jaden Daniels, who, as I said, you imagine him at Washington with Baltimore with Lamar Jackson. That's the comp. So I just keep hearing things about J.J. McCarthy. I have the final mock coming out Wednesday. I'm still not convinced 2 overall is where he's going to go, but you hear it. So it's out there. Matt Miller's talked about it more than anybody, that Michigan's quarterback J.J. McCarthy could go 2. I'm not saying I'm not buying it, but I'm not convinced that's going to happen right now.
I'm with you, Mel. I've talked about this a little bit in the past on the show, but I'll just continue to mention it in case it happens. The idea that Chop Robinson goes in the first 15 picks, Mel. You mentioned him just a few moments ago, why the production is not great, but the traits are really, really, really good. And Mel, my goodness, are they really, really good. Other than the length, he was 6'0", 2'6", a little shorter than some teams were expecting him to be. But that first step, Mel, I mean, you watch him and you think that you're watching a play in fast forward. Such an explosive rusher with a gifted first step. And generally speaking, pass rushers do not last long on the board, especially in a class, Mel, that we don't think stacks up to some of the recent classes that we have had. There is no Bosa, there is no, last year, 2 years ago, Aiden Hutchinson. There is not that kind of prospect available in this year's class. Let's talk about teams that we think could be on the move here, Mel. Is there a team that you think could move up in the first round that comes to mind? Start wherever you want, and I'll fill in some gaps from there.
All right, I already talked second round with maybe the Giants moving up for a quarterback in the Rams. I think the Buffalo Bills are going to be an interesting team because of the Stephon Diggs trade and wide receiver Josh Allen. Yeah, you have some guys they like there, led by, of course, Khalil Shakir. But do they move all the way up in the top 10 to get Rome Odunze if he slides down to that 8th spot, right? Or do they move up? And these teams really want to move out of there, and is the compensation going to be good enough? Julio Jones, Atlanta moved up to get from 27 to 6. They get up a lot to get him, but they acquired a great number 1 go-to receiver, one of the best in the league in Julio Jones. Will the opportunity be afforded to the Buffalo Bills, and will they want to do that? Or will they want to move up into the mid-first, right, to get an Xavier Worthy, to get an Adonai Mitchell? Do you have to move? How far do you have to move up to get Adonai Mitchell? Is it 4, 5, 6 spots? It may not have to be that quantum leap, but it may be a leap from the late first, maybe up 5, 6, 7 spots to get the wide receiver they love, whether it's Brian Thomas Jr., and I do think he could slide down into that 20, 25 area, or at that point, Adonai Mitchell, sure-handed. He's going to catch those Josh Allen fastballs. Adonai Mitchell doesn't drop anything. Xavier Worthy, we talked about with the speed. Xavier Legette, big-bodied A.J. Brown type. Who was the receiver that Brandon Beane targets? I got to believe, Field, the Buffalo Bills are aggressive and move up. Maybe not in the top 10 to get and the Rome Odunze, say, but certainly up from where they are to get one of those receivers I just talked about around that 20 to 23 area.
No two ways about it. Buffalo feels like they scream the possibility of moving up. Minnesota, we've talked about plenty of times already here, Mel, so it wouldn't surprise me if they want to move up, of course. And then here's where I think things get a little bit interesting, Mel. And I don't have a specific team in mind because it's going to be dependent upon how things shake out. But once we get to the Tennessee Titans at number 7, we could see a world in which Joe Alt, Troy Fautanu, Tali Fuaga, J.C. Latham, Olu Fashanu all get taken in like a, 8 or 9 span pick, right? Starting from 7 and going all the way until 16 or 17. The Bengals, as example, number 18, also very much looking for that offensive tackle market. One of those teams might be saying to itself, we don't want to miss out on our guy. We want to move up. I know that the public grades these offensive tackles very similarly, but it wouldn't surprise me if we had a bit of an arms race in that early teens range to move up for one of these tackles that a team really, truly prefers. Let's get to the next question, Mel. Who do you think has the toughest decision to make on day 1 of the NFL draft?
I think it's the New York Jets have a difficult decision at 10 because you have a situation where do you get Aaron Rodgers another weapon, okay? Or do you continue to fortify the offensive line? The offensive line, they brought in some guys who are a little older. Think about those tackles, 33 years of age with an injury history, right? Vera Tucker's had injury issues, okay? So do you go for the offensive lineman like, say, a J.C. Latham from Alabama, right? Or do you take a Brock Bowers? Or, not having a 2, do you trade down? Do you trade down and try to, for Joe Douglas, general manager, acquire some more picks by moving off of that 10 spot, knowing that some of those linemen that you talked about would still be on the board possibly? I'm not talking about moving way down, but move down 5, 6 spots, Field. And Brock Bowers still there. And those receivers after the top 3 still there. So they would have a decision make at 10. I still think Brock Bowers has to be heavily in that decision making. You mentioned Fautanu. I talked about Latham. There's going to be options there. If they only have to move down 4, 5, 6 spots, they're pretty sure they're going to get one of those guys, Bowers or one of those linemen. So It's going to be really interesting to see what Joe Douglas decides to do at 10 if he gets a great offer to move off of that pick.
All right, so I'll go with the Arizona Cardinals, Mel, because they currently sit at number 4, and we believe that teams are going to be angling to move up to pick number 4 to draft a quarterback. Here's the risk that I think that Monty Ossenfort, their GM, runs, is that we know if he moves down from 4 to, let's say, 11, where Minnesota is, he is going to get a mountain of picks. And with a team that still has a lot of needs and that still has a quarterback who, although he's been around for a while, is young enough where you can play a little bit of the long game here, Mel. You may say to yourself, acquire as many assets as possible. But go check out that wide receiver depth chart right now, Mel, and it is not going to scare anybody. And while this class has so much depth at wide receiver, I believe, and I don't feel like I'm speaking, I don't feel like I'm being out of turn and speaking for you as well, Mel, the difference between wide receiver 3 and wide receiver 4 is significant. Marvin Harrison Jr., Malik Neighbors, Rome Odunze, all should become special players. There's a chance that A.D. Mitchell and Brian Thomas get there as well. But those first 3, to me, feel like is about as safe as it gets in the NFL draft. If you move from 4 to 11, I think you're missing out on all 3 of those guys. So if you're Monty Ossenfort, can you pull a remix of what you did last year? Move down from 4 to 11, but then have a team that you're trading up with already, like they did last year when they moved from 3 to 12 to 6. Mel, I think it's a complicated process for the Cardinals.
Yeah, I think those 3 are special. And then you were right. There's mixed opinion on a Brian Thomas Jr. from LSU about how good he can be. Xavier Worthy at 165 pounds. You're a skeptic about that, Field. I love Xavier Worthy from Texas, but you're right. There is a nice gap between, if you want to go Odunze as the 3rd receiver, which is splitting hairs between him and Neighbors, and splitting hairs between him and Marvin Harrison Jr., but they are 3 elite guys. The 4th guy, there's a separation. So I'm with Arizona. I don't think can afford to move off that pick. If they do, they're losing those 3 stud receivers.
Yeah, I feel good about it because of the trade assets that you would be, the draft assets you would be acquiring in that trade down. I would feel great about it if they had a second deal already lined up. 4 to 11, 11 to, and I'm just making this up here, people, just making it up. 4 to 11, 11 to 8. Hey, at number 8, we feel great about one of those 3 guys being there because we know that 4 quarterbacks are going off the board already. All right, there's our plan. We're executing from there. All right, coming up here on First Draft, we have more burning questions to dive into, including some personal days. No, not for Mel and I. We're not going anywhere. Personal days for prospects. We'll discuss those next. All right, back here on First Draft, he's Mel Kiper Jr. I am Field Yates, and Mel, pro days behind us. They're all done, but there are a couple of, we'll call them personal days for players who were injured either during their final season or at some point during the pre-draft process who still have some work to do. That includes the aforementioned Cooper DeJean, who's working out for scouts today, Johnny Newton from Illinois. Who are some names that you think could potentially boost their stock if those personal days go as they desire for them to go?
I think Johnny Newton is an interesting guy. He's a 3 technique, as you said, the injury, but at Illinois, to tell you what, he was tough to handle one-on-one. He's what NFL teams want. I think 2nd round area, and you talk about that 2nd defensive tackle. I mentioned Ruka Rororo. Johnny Newton's in that mix as well. He's a really good player, and what teams want is that upfield explosion. They want guys who can be disruptive and get you some pressures and get sacks as well. And Johnny Newton, when he was on his game at 100%, he was able to do that at Illinois. So I think Johnny Newton certainly, we talked about Kiper DeJean enough, but I think when you look at who comes in to visit, I mentioned this kid a few weeks ago, Quantez Stiggers, the quarterback from the Toronto Argonauts, the CFL star, Rookie of the Year, right? He is a kid, 22 years of age. He goes to the All-Star game, the East-West game. He tests pretty well. Bottom line is Quantez Stiggers is going to be a day 3 intriguing guy to keep an eye on because the cornerback spot has a lot of, after the top 10, you get into some iffy areas. Quantez Stiggers showed what he could do this year. He had 5-6 interceptions. He had a heck of a job. He was a surprise. He was a shocker. Like I said, CFL Rookie of the Year. This is a kid. He's a great kid. I think he's really impressed people when they brought him into their building in terms of the type of kid he is, the work ethic he is, how smart he is, and a class act. So Quantez Stiggers is making, I think, a really good impression field on NFL teams in these pre-draft visits.
Yeah, Mel, he's been through a lot in life. There was a reason why he decided to stop playing football, went through some real personal hardships. He was at Lane College. He ends up back at home in Atlanta, where he is from. And the fan-controlled football league is where he first came onto the map. He met the man who was the offensive coordinator for the Toronto Argonauts. The team that you just referenced becomes the CFL Defensive Rookie of the Year and an all-star player as well. So it wouldn't surprise me if, despite his unique path, he gets drafted at some point in day 3. But you mentioned the two biggest ones, Mel. It's Kiper DeJean. It's also Johnny Newton. Newton, I would say the grades are about where you had him there. I think there's a chance he slides into the end of first round, but certainly wouldn't be surprised if it's somewhere in the mid-30s as well for Johnny Newton, a player coming off of that foot injury. All right, Mel, let's do this one. Pick a player, pick the perfect spot. Who would it be, and why?
I think it's the Atlanta Falcons with Dallas Turner.
Okay.
I think that spot, you really look at the first defensive player off the board, a pass rusher who I want to see get a counter move. I'm not sold on Dallas Turner as a super elite. People say, well, he'll test better. He tested better than Will Anderson Jr. He's not the player Will Anderson Jr. was. Let's make that mistake. Not make that mistake to say he's Will Anderson Jr. He's not Will Anderson Jr. Will Anderson Jr. is a guy who was incredibly productive, and this kid didn't always have that. 2022 didn't, stepped it up this year, but it wasn't off the charts. And that counter move, that secondary move, has to be developed. So coaching with Dallas Turner is going to be very critical, but the Falcons need that kind of guy. I think he will go at 8 to them. If he doesn't, it would be a surprise. I think that's a really good spot for what they need, the type of player maybe Dallas Turner could become, that double-digit sack guy. He's not there yet. I won't say there's boom or bust there with Dallas Turner, but I think there's some question whether he can be elite. But he has the talent to be elite. And that's going to be where I think he comes off the board at 8 to the Atlanta Falcons.
You know, Mel, I did something a while back that I thought was actually fairly important and illustrative to me. I went back and I watched in succession all of Dallas Turner's sacks from this past year, and then all of Laiatu Latu's in back-to-back tape sessions, right? So this was basically, it was running through 25-ish plays combined for these two players. I think it was 10.5 for Dallas Turner and 13.5 for Laiatu Latu. And it was so interesting to see the kind of sacks that these two players registered, right? Because to your point, like that super elite pass rush skill that we saw from Laiatu Latu was a bunch of sacks that like the quarterback had barely planted his feet to throw the football, and Laiatu Latu was up in his grill. Now, it's a different conference, it's different competition, it's a different scheme. I am granting you all of those things. Dallas Turner, I felt like more of his sacks, as opposed to Laiatu Latu's, were cleanup, pressure sacks where somebody else is also generating that first pressure. Sacks in which, the coverage helps him, and next thing you know, he's closing in. I am not saying I don't love Dallas Turner. He's the 11th highest rated player on my board, for Pete's sake. That being said, if you're talking about a guy who just gets home in a hurry, it's Laiatu Latu. It's why I will continue to believe, until I'm proven wrong, he has more upside than any other pass rusher in this entire class, Mel.
I'll say this, Phil. We had Jordan Morgan on the Darian Mel show one Saturday, and Jordan Morgan, offensive tackle for Arizona, said Laiatu Latu has a lot of tools to work with. He has a lot of variety in the ways he can get after the quarterback. That makes him very difficult to basically prepare for and to handle in those situations for a left tackle. So Jordan Morgan, a heck of a player, right? Out of Arizona, probably a late one, early two, right? Because he left tackle, right tackle, guard, play anywhere, right? But Jordan Morgan said Latu has so many ways, okay? Slippery. He's got bend. He got spin. You don't know what he's going to do. He gets in the mind of those offensive tackles because they see him on film and say, boy, this guy's a nightmare to try to handle. Laiatu Latu is going to be really intriguing where he comes off the board. I'm working on that. I think in that where Jalen Phillips came off with an 18, at 19 is the Rams field with Latu. I think that would make a lot of sense there with the LA Rams.
I'll tell you what, Mel, I know we're actually taping the show with Matt Miller on player comps. He loves the comps. I like more of the traits. The comps are harder for me. Matt does a great job with them. The way that Leatu Latu can bend and torque and make his body small to get around offensive tackles, the only player that I can think of that does it like that, Mel, Max Crosby. I'm not saying he's Max Crosby yet. Max Crosby is one of the 5 best defensive players alive. The guy is a walking 10-sack season with 80 tackles and constant disruption. I'm just saying, I just think the skill set is so special that it gets me fired up that people are perhaps overlooking Leatu Latu because it's something that is out of our control and out of our knowledge base, truthfully, in terms of how all 32 teams assess him medically. I will offer one myself, Mel. It is a perfect spot. Marvin Harrison Jr. going to the Arizona Cardinals. I just discussed how this is something that I think Arizona needs to be kind of careful about, right? I love the idea of acquiring as many picks as possible. But I also think to myself, Mel, sometimes it's easy to just do the simple thing in the draft. And that to me would be taking Marvin Harrison Jr. If you told me that Marvin Harrison Jr. went 4th overall in this year's draft class, independent of knowing what the draft order was and which team was taking him at 4, I know you'd say that's a good value. Probably the 2nd or 3rd highest rated player on your board. So I get it. Arizona could add so many pieces, Mel, but the certainty of Marvin Harrison Jr. for a roster that is so bereft of wide receiver talent right now, to me, makes it very appealing for Arizona to just say, here's the card, Commissioner Goodell. Marvin Harrison Jr., welcome to Arizona. What number do you want to wear?
I'm with you, Field. I think he's a heck of a football player. And I think when you look at where he'll go right now, you think about the slippery off the edge guys, the guys that can be double-digit sacks if they're healthy. He certainly bodes well in that area, Field. And I'll tell you what, when we talk about guys that are moving up boards, right? We talk about guys who are I haven't heard a lot about Keaton Slovis. Keaton Slovis is a quarterback that's moved around. He's been at USC where he was great right away, right? Then he moves on to Pitt. It didn't work out after Kenny Pickett left. It wasn't the same thing. You think about not having Addison. The offensive line had some issues. Then to BYU. Keaton Slovis, I think, is gaining some momentum as that 5th, 6th, 7th round quarterback, that late round quarterback that people have forgotten about that showed some ability. And Drew Phillips, cornerback Kentucky, is gaining momentum. Versatility, heck of a year. Drew Phillips, cornerback Kentucky, is, I think, moving up the ranks. And don't forget about that other Washington receiver field. It's not Polk. It's Jalen McMillan. Jalen McMillan now ran under 4.5. He's got length. He catches everything. He's a good route runner. Jalen McMillan, Washington Husky, the other guy, is not Romo Dunze or Jalen Polk, has definitely stepped up and I think could be in that 2nd, early 3rd round discussion.
Yeah, I think he's a 3rd round guy as well, Mel. He, to me, is Jacoby Myers. He's a big slot receiver with better speed than Jacoby Myers, but this guy catches everything to your point. He was awesome after the catch as well. Drew Phillips, interesting one. What's the range here on Drew Phillips? Is that like a round 4 to 5 type of guy for you?
I think he's late 2nd, early to mid 3rd. I think he's the kind of guy Field jumps up. When you talk about being a guy, can be slot, can be outside. He will tackle. He's a guy, didn't have any interceptions. That's about it. That ball. Interception number, you wish you had a few. He didn't have any, but I think Drew Phillips goes a lot earlier than people think.
Yeah, he seems to be a name that has been red hot for quite some time. All right, coming up here next on First Draft, we wrap up with some thoughts on what's ahead over the next 17 days until the 2024 NFL Draft, including a reminder about what is ahead for this guy this week. All right, back here on First Draft, he's Mel Kiper Jr. I am Field Yates. And Mel, let's just talk about this again. We have your mock 4.0 coming out on Wednesday. I want to ask you this question. Is there peace of mind because this is the last mock draft that you will have to do, even though it's 17 days out? Or is there some anxiety because if anything crazy happens over the next 2 weeks, you don't have a chance to go back and update your last mock draft?
I will be addressing all that on the morning of the draft, Field. The morning of the draft, I'm going to have news and notes. I may even have projections, teams that could be looking at a certain player, but it's not going to be locked into a mock because trades will impact that. If you're wrong on one guy, it affects everything. I'm going to give a variety of things that I feel strongly about. Not the ones I'm borderline on or have no clue about. I'm just guessing. I'm going to try to give more intel about what I'm actually hearing, what I actually believe, who's hot, who maybe is not right now, who's dropping back, or maybe who in projections, because a lot of this isn't changing with these teams. They start their big meetings today, okay, where they're getting it all finalized. But who's going to drop a little further than some of the projections indicate? Who will go a little earlier than some people are thinking? Like a Drew Phillips from Kentucky, who could be a little bit earlier than anticipated. Brought up Jalen McMillan. There's a lot of other ones as well could be in that mix. That's what I'm going to be talking about the morning of the draft field rather than locking in to a mock draft. So it's going to be, I think, a ton more information, and I'll have a lot more time to do it instead of spending 10 hours on a mock draft that goes by the boards as soon as the first or second pick is made.
Okay, so that's what I'm going to be doing on Wednesday before the draft, is 10 hours on a mock draft. I might be awake for a full 24 hours before round one of the NFL draft. But before we get to the draft, we have our mega mock. So tomorrow, on Thursday, when the next podcast drops, it'll be you, it'll be me, and talk about some brain power. We got Matt Miller and Jordan Reed also joining us, two outstanding draft analysts, Mel. We're going to do a mega mock. It is going to be all four of us picking like mini teams here, Mel. It should be a ton of fun. We have done this in the past. This is my first time being one of the pickers. But what's cool about this exercise, Mel, is there's some strategy involved too, right? Last year you waited on your guy Will Levis. You got him with one of the final picks in the entire exercise because you know that nobody else is going to be taking a quarterback after they have already made their first pick at quarterback. I wanted to ask you, I'm just going to go off the cuff here, Mel, because you were talking about Dallas Turner, the edge rusher from Alabama during one of our last segments. I was just curious, and a player that I was rewatching this past weekend, generating some thoughts about where he might end up. What do you think about his partner in crime, Mr. Chris Braswell at Alabama, and where he might end up hearing his name called on draft night? Is that like late round 2, early round 3, more like mid round 3? Where do you see that one?
I'm doing that first and second round mock field, and I think when you look at Baltimore, the Ravens love Alabama players, right? And I'm thinking about maybe Kool-Aid McKinstry, cornerback, Alabama in the first. They double up with Chris Braswell, but they re-sign Kyle Van Noy, David Ojabo. We'll see coming off the injury how he develops, coming out of Michigan as a second-round pick a few years ago. So I think there's options there. They also could use an offensive lineman, but Chris Braswell, I'm with you. Late second, early to mid-third round for him. Like I say, Drew Phillips, maybe I'm a little higher on him than some are, but I'm debating where he goes. I have a big issue with the offensive tackles. Patrick Paul Houston, it's a mixed opinion. Kingsley Suamataia, BYU, mixed opinion, right? Yeah. A guy that's moving up, Cooper Beebe, okay, from Kansas State. Cooper Beebe, guard, played left tackle, played right tackle. He's the kind of guy with the versatility, could be really intriguing in that late second round area. Versatile guys as well, like Javon Bullard, defensive back out of Georgia, right? He's the reason why they moved on and won a national title, because he had that hit on Marvin Harrison Jr., but he moves around. He can do a lot with Javon Bullard out of Georgia as a second round draft choice as well. And Kool-Aid McKinstry, I mentioned, when she ran that 4.48 field, coming off that Jones fracture, Kool-Aid McKinstry, I believe, press corner, solid player, right? Forget the punt returns. Solid corner. I think he goes in that late first round mix. And my guy TJ Tampa from Iowa State, do not sleep on this kid. He is a heck of a player. Yes, he didn't run 4.45. He ran, 4.52. Go back and watch the tape of TJ Tampa. If you don't like him, then I don't understand football, because all TJ Tampa did was lock down, tackle, former receiver in high school. TJ Tampa's business-like in his approach. I think somebody's going to get a heck of a player in the early to mid-second round with TJ Tampa, cornerback, Iowa State.
My only advice is don't watch the Kansas State game. It was late in the season. It might have been the last regular season game for Iowa State and Kansas State, because it was like a foot of snow there, Mel. You can barely see the jersey numbers, much less, when you have the team that's wearing the white uniforms, you can barely tell who's who. So TJ Tampa certainly is one of your guys. All right, we got about, maybe a minute or so left here, Mel. Any closing thoughts? 2 minutes left here, Mel. Anything that you feel like you want to empty out? This is almost like Mel's off script here, mini version right here, right now.
Yeah, I went off. I talked about Keaton Slowitz. I'd like to get your take on this field, because we're always looking for that quarterback on day 3. I talked about Michael Pratt from Tulane. We've gone with the Rattler, Spencer Rattler. Keaton Slowitz. And I went back and looked, as I was watching Suamataia, and I'm watching Slowitz manipulating the pocket, stepping up, moving around, getting the ball off when he's under pressure, making accurate throws. Remember, they didn't have Puka Nacua this year, right? Think about it, Pitt. He didn't have Jordan Addison when he went to Pitt, right? He didn't have the offensive coordinator. Great. Mark Whipple had moved on. Mark Whipple did a great job developing Kenny Pickett. Had that pass offense, best in the history of Pitt, right? He wasn't there. A new coordinator came in. The offensive line had some injuries. Keaton Slovis isn't 25. He's 22. I think he turns 23 this week, right? Bottom line is, Keaton Slovis is a freshman at USC, where he's freshman of the year, by the way.
Yeah.
Looked like a future high draft choice. If you can get him, Field, what do you think? 5th, 6th, 7th round?
Mel, he's one of my sleeper quarterbacks. So now I feel like he's no longer a sleeper. So you just spoiled that one for me, Mel. What do you think about that? You know, we have our meetings right now with Rob Adamski, producer of Day 3 of the draft, the great Rob Adamski. And he asked me, give me some names you really want to hit on Day 3 when they get drafted. And I said, give me Keaton Slovis. Well, now I might have to fight for him with Mel Kiper Jr. because I believe, I'm with you, there is some natural talent there that if you're looking for a developmental late Day 3 pick, Keaton Slovis, a name to know. All right, Mel, that was a ton of ground covered right there. We appreciate everybody who joined us here on First Draft. We're back on Thursday with Jordan and Matt. For Mel, I am Field, and thanks for tuning in. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, review, listen on Amazon Music or wherever you get your podcasts. We'll see you Thursday.